Hello and welcome to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse, stories of survival and hope after financial abuse, after marriage and romantic partnership. I'm your host, Lori G., and today from across the pond and the beautiful United Kingdom is guest Rosie Watson. Rosie is the head of external relations for the organization's the Domestic Abuse Alliance. She is also a trailblazer in development of new high-tech solutions that can reduce a victim's access to emergency, legal, and civil protection from days to just hours. Rosie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Laurie. It's great to be speaking with you.
So where in the world are you now, and where are you originally from?
Today, I am talking to you from the south coast of the UK, near the seaside city of Brighton. I don't know if you've been here before, but it's a really lovely sunny spot. Really grateful to you, actually, for providing your platform to talk about something that has become such an important global issue. So great to swap views and news stateside with you.
Well, how did you become passionate and involved with working with domestic violence survivors?
So I started working on the fringes of the domestic abuse sector here in the UK in around 2012. And that was at a time when there was a really huge change in England and Wales to the way that police chief constables were held to account. And so we had the introduction of Police and Crime Commissioners over here. And what that's done is provide much greater oversight and public engagement in policing priorities. And that includes how and what kinds of support services for victims of crime are commissioned locally. And I left that role when I had my son 9 years ago, and I went on to join the Domestic Abuse Alliance in 2020. And here I really help our organisation shine a spotlight on the work that we do to support survivors of domestic abuse, to help them seek civil legal support, and also to improve access to third-party referral pathways like ours for UK policing.
Now, your country just passed a law to help, prevent coercion and control. What is that law? Because I've been reading a little bit about it, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, so historically, domestic abuse here has been, and in fact, probably globally, has been kind of widely viewed as physical harm. But, you and I both know that coercive control, which is a psychological type of domestic abuse, and that is where a perpetrator may use threats, humiliation, intimidation to harm and frighten their victim. So actually, coercive and controlling behaviour, or CCB, has been a criminal offence in the UK since 2015. However, this year, there's been a change in the law around how people who are convicted of CCB are managed. And so before that law change, if you were convicted of CCB, then you could really only be managed on a kind of discretionary basis. But now offenders who are convicted of CCB will face much tougher management from police, from probation services. And really what that means is that finally CCB is a crime that's being considered on a par with other domestic abuse offences such as threats to kill, stalking. So in practice, how that will work is for offenders who are convicted of CCB, and if they're sentenced to 12 months or more, they will automatically now be managed under multi-agency public protection arrangements, bit of a mouthful. So it's kind of known as MAPA. And under those MAPA arrangements, you will have authorities like the police, probation, prison services, and other agencies who are now legally required to work together to better manage the risks that are posed by those offenders. And an example might be that agencies will be legally obliged under those MAPA arrangements to share any information that might indicate an increased risk to a former partner or to other members of the public. So a really important step change in the law over here.
So what you're saying, I guess, is that it was a slap on the wrist more, and now it's no longer a slap on the wrist. And financial abuse certainly falls under that category of coercion and control.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why financial abuse so much falls between the cracks, because you don't get bruises from financial abuse. You do financially, but you don't physically. It can be kind of a nebulous area.
Absolutely. And I think domestic abuse generally still remains a very hidden crime. And a lot of that is due to a lack of reporting by those who may be living with it, a lack of confidence or trust in policing and other statutory authorities and the government, etc. But it's a really insidious crime. And a lot of the ways that domestic abuse is perpetrated like you say, with financial abuse can be very hidden, can be very difficult to spot the signs of that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the Domestic Abuse Alliance that you are with offers essential services using technology-driven solutions to bring support. Explain to us what your organization brings to the table in terms of resources, what you mean in general by being technology-driven.
So when we established the Domestic Abuse Alliance, it was really with a kind of a single aim, and that was to significantly reduce the time it was taking for victims to receive civil legal support. So if we look at what that process looked like previously, it could take up to 2 weeks, sometimes even longer, from the point that a survivor made a report to the police to local legal assistance being put in place for them. So over here, often the courts in England and Wales will ask for evidence of physical abuse or a threat to life, a threat of harm in the past 14 days. It's a really dreadful phrase, but they're labelled as one of the merits when you're applying for emergency protection. And so if it was taking somebody 2 weeks or even more to actually locate that legal support, then effectively that meant that the victim survivor was out of time before they'd even started that application process, like incredibly unsatisfactory, not only for that individual, but for the frontline service that's supporting them. So really that is why we developed WEPROTECT. So WEPROTECT is a free-to-use app. It significantly reduces the referral timeline to a matter of hours and sometimes even minutes.
Wow.
So in practical terms, what that means is if we use the police as an example, they're just one service that might use WeProtect. So police officer will make a referral through the WeProtect app. Our team receives that referral and then undertakes to make contact with the victim survivor within 24 hours. And at that point, we will speak to that person, assess their situation, their circumstances, provide information about their legal rights, the options that are available to them. And where a court order is required, we will then support that person to complete all of the necessary applications and then arrange for a solicitor's firm in our legal partner network to attend the court hearings with them. So that's really, we're all about accelerating that access to civil legal support for victim survivors so that they can receive that help as soon as possible, get that protection in place, and so they can ultimately start to feel safe again.
Well, and not knowing where to go for legal protection or civil protection is why so many of us don't do the ultimate calling the police. Because if we don't know what we're going to do afterwards, it's like, yeah, you'll get this horrible person away from me. But then what do I do?
Absolutely. And I think, there is a lot of feelings and thoughts and emotions, and not least the vulnerable situation that somebody may find themselves and their children in at a time like that. And I think all of those things can be barriers to somebody speaking out, breaking the silence and seeking support.
How do you partner with people for this?
The service itself is free to use. There's no charge for the police forces or other frontline services that access it. There is no charge to the victims' survivors who receive support through it. We, as an organisation, are funded through the arrangements that we have in place with our legal partner network. So that are the law firms that we work with to put this protection in place. We essentially provide them with a court-ready bundle. So they just have to make the application to court and provide the legal representation in court. So we take a lot of the administration work away from them so that they can focus on the legal advocacy. I'm not sure if it's the same in the States, but, historically there has been a lack of funding for support services like WeProtect and others. It's something that support services constantly campaign for. We have a new government since last summer. Here in the UK, they've made a very ambitious pledge to halve violence against women in the next 10 years. It remains to be seen how they are going to achieve that, but hopefully that will involve shoring up better funding for support for victims.
Yeah, one of the challenges we have here in the United States is that, we are becoming a very global culture. And I know the UK is as well. And with a very multicultural environment developing so quickly, where we have language barriers, we have theological barriers in some cases when it comes to where a woman's role is in a relationship. What kind of challenges do you see over there in the UK in bringing resources to women who are coming in from other countries, other cultures, maybe other fundamental ideas of what their place is?
That's a really important question because I think culturally, domestic abuse means very different things to different people. And in fact,
exactly, yeah.
Some cultures and the women within those cultures won't recognize that what they are experiencing is domestic abuse because it may be either widely accepted within those cultures or it's not challenged either. So that is a really important consideration. You mentioned language barriers, and there are significant gaps in language support, particularly for victims who speak English as a second language. We know that that can be weaponized by perpetrators in their defense in court. One of the things that we've established here, kind of within the Domestic Abuse Alliance suite of services, is access to interpretation and translation capabilities. So we can offer that support either remotely or face-to-face at legal aid rates. But, mentioning legal aid, that again goes back to your point around how is this type of support financed? And we have a legal aid system here in the UK. Unfortunately, for victims of domestic abuse, that system is still means tested. That's something that our organisation and many others have campaigned for a long time, to remove means testing for anyone who's living with domestic abuse, because the priority should be to help them escape that dangerous situation. I think that campaign will continue to be a marathon and not a sprint. But yeah, it can be very tricky. And in fact, going back to your earlier point around financial abuse, and the reason, that we're sitting here today to talk about this is that if you're in employment, you earn over a certain amount of money each year here in the UK, then that may mean that you are not eligible to apply for legal aid. But, as we've discussed already, if you are being financially abused, you may not have access to any private finance. And so the cycle continues.
Yeah, it definitely does. Your organization actually does a lot of awareness training for employers and businesses. What kind of domestic violence awareness do you think employers and employees need?
Employers can play a really crucial role in tackling domestic abuse. And, we say that domestic abuse should be everyone's business because we all have a role to play. So here, only around 5% of employers will have a specific domestic abuse policy or guidelines in place at work. But we know that every business will have staff in there who are affected by it. Like you say, access to the right information, tools, guidance, resources. It's essential to help businesses support their workforce. And that's why we have done quite a bit of work in this area. So we've worked with our ambassador, Sharon Livermore. She is a survivor of domestic abuse herself. When she was experiencing abuse, she really received very little support from her employer for no other reason than they were not educated on domestic abuse and how to support her. So together, we have co-created a suite of resources to help employers really take action on domestic abuse, help them spot the signs, encourage disclosures, and also to be able to signpost employees who are affected by it to the right kind of support. Here, 1 in 4 women actually will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. So tackling domestic abuse is certainly a moral imperative, but there's also an economic imperative behind this too. So police will receive a domestic abuse-related call every 30 seconds in England and Wales, and more than 10% of the total policing budget is spent on tackling domestic abuse. When you look at that from an employer's point of view, lost economic output, reduced productivity, all of resulting from domestic abuse costs this country £14 billion. Wow. And the UK Home Office also estimate that the cost of physical and emotional harm totals nearly £50 billion. So if we take those figures and think about it in real terms with inflation, etc., today we are looking at almost £78 billion being spent on dealing with the repercussions of domestic abuse. So over here we talk about domestic abuse being described as an epidemic, and it really is. And the thing that is really clear is we have to stop it.
I had a guest say this recently. You have a car accident, call your boss and say you can't come into work for 3 days because you have a back injury. That's a perfectly acceptable situation. But your husband just emptied your bank account and ran off with the neighbor's wife. You can't call your boss and say, I can't come in for a few days. I've been severely traumatized. That's not recognized as a reason not to go to work. So you drag yourself to the office. You are literally in deep trauma, and eventually you just have a breakdown, or as you were just saying, you're no longer productive when something like this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes employers sometimes feel that what happens at home isn't their business.
Yeah.
But if we look at what happened during COVID, it really created a perfect storm for domestic abuse perpetrators and victim survivors, because you suddenly had huge swathes of the UK workforce working from home, right? And suddenly that workplace was not a safe space. I mean, Sharon, when she shares her story, she talks about going into work and that being her safe place, because in the office, it was really the only place that her perpetrator couldn't touch her or reach her. I mean, he did try to reach her on her, work phone, etc. But the point was that she was able to disclose in the workplace. But, we're all working from, I'm talking to you from my home office today. I wouldn't be able to have a safe conversation with you and disclose domestic abuse to you if my perpetrator was also working from home and in my workplace. So, yeah, I think COVID really has accelerated this kind of responsibility for employers to do more. And, there's a bill that is going through Parliament here at the moment. It's called the Safe Leave Bill. And if that is successful and it is passed and enacted, then it will require employers to grant their employees safe leave if they're experiencing domestic abuse.
Because one of the ways that these predatory, abusive partners cause employment problems is you may feel safe at your job, but they do constantly text you. They do want to make sure you are at work, or they will be outside as soon as you walk out the door after work. So for employers to recognize that stuff, honestly, it doesn't register to us as fellow employees. In talking about employers and businesses, I think fellow employees as well could really learn some awareness on whether you have a coworker in your sales department or your administration department that you suspect is under abuse.
Absolutely. And it's about creating those safe places at work to start those conversations and empowering line managers, HR teams to feel equipped to have those conversations as well, and to do that in the right way.
Wow, I never even thought about that. HR, they're really on the front lines with employees and issues with employees. I wonder how much domestic violence awareness training the average HR person gets. I have no idea.
No, and I think a lot of the training tends to be around
firing people, right?
Yeah, right. Here in the UK, it tends to fall under workplace wellbeing. I think the aim here is that we start a conversation around domestic abuse with employers in the same way that we started the conversation around mental health. There is the stigma around mental health, I'm sure, is still there for some, but we've moved on a lot, I think, in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. And it's something that we tend to talk about much more openly. We need to be able to reach a point where we can have those sorts of conversations about domestic abuse too.
And it is becoming more and more awareness, although I am very surprised that I'm the first person to do a podcast on financial abuse, when in fact it is becoming so more publicly aware, but it's still considered like a niche topic. And that's why I love that law that you passed, because I think that's going to make a big difference. I hope we start looking at doing a law like that here and bringing that kind of awareness to employers here. What does Domestic Abuse Alliance have coming up in the 2025 for events and news and fundraisers?
We actually don't receive grant funding in any way. One of the things that we've been working on for the last 30 months is we have been supporting an independent evaluation of the WEPROTECT service. So it's really exciting because WEPROTECT is the only service of its kind to go through an evaluation like that. It's been carried out by the University of Birmingham, and they received Home Office What Works to Prevent VORG funding. So it's a really important study. A lot of work that's been put into that. It's due to be published later this spring, and we hope that it will lay out the benefits of the WeProtect pathway, not only in terms of reducing demand on UK policing, but more importantly, improving access to support for victim survivors of abuse. And if that paves the way for more grant funding for these sorts of pathways, then, that would be an incredible thing. We do fundraise, though, for other organisations, and we're really proud to be an accredited supporter of White Ribbon, which is the UK's leading charity that engages men and boys to help prevent violence against women and girls. We're currently planning a really exciting fundraising event for them later this year. So watch this space, Laurie.
Wow, that's a lot. What is the population size that uses the WeProtect service?
So currently there are 10 UK police forces that use it. We have 43 police forces in England and Wales. So we're a quarter of the way there. We would obviously like more to use the service. There's a lot of specialist support services here that also make referrals using WeProtect too. So services, charities and organisations that provide specialist practical or emotional support to victim survivors too. And increasingly we're seeing, like we've talked about earlier, employers using the referral pathway to support their workforce. We have healthcare trusts here, housing teams, really anyone who works on the front line can access the service.
Do you plan to expand this? Now, this is UK wide, so you are a national organization, but do you plan to expand this beyond to other UK territories? You have Canada, Australia.
That's a really interesting question and in fact, we were asked this on a post on LinkedIn the other day, actually. There's no reason why the WeProtect technology and referral pathway couldn't be used in any territory. The only thing that would be different would be the legal jurisdiction and the civil legal options that would be available in any of those other territories. So sure, the mechanism is there and can absolutely be used. It would just be the types of civil protections and the application process for those that may differ from country to country.
Yeah, the partnerships would be different, but the fundamental idea of having really a quick and easy resource when you are in a situation where you need legal support, and I'm more that can relate to that. It seems like that's just a no-brainer for anybody, especially in the United States. I mean, I would love to see that in the United States. We have 56,000 divorce attorneys here, and to partner with a few firms and have access to that, I think that's a really cool idea.
It's really important that civil legal protection is not positioned as an alternative to a criminal justice outcome, because we know that is obviously very important for a victim survivor. And it's quite right that their perpetrators should be brought to justice. But the reality that we face here is that those criminal proceedings can often take an incredibly long time to come to court. And there is no guarantee of a prosecution or conviction, at the end of that. And civil legal protection is something that can be put in place much more quickly. And importantly for the victim survivor, they are central to that process, which is very empowering for them. And it means that they can start to try to cope and recover from that trauma. Whereas if you're waiting 1 year, 2 years, sometimes even longer for a criminal case to reach the court, it's a very long time to be sitting with that trauma. So It's great that there are options available. And that at the end of the day, that's the victim survivor can make an informed choice about what's right for them.
Yeah, and to have such great options and to have them at your fingertips certainly is going to be a lifesaver and is a lifesaver for so many in the UK. Rosie, I am so grateful to have had you on the show today. And I do have 2 questions that I ask every guest. 1, what is your tip for someone listening right now who is still under abuse but hasn't taken any steps to leave?
Oh, Laurie, the first thing I would say to anyone who is in that situation is please, please know that you are not alone. You have nothing to be ashamed of, and there is support available. So please, if you can find a way to break that silence, please try to. Here in the UK, we have a national 24-hour free confidential domestic abuse helpline. As always, if you are in any kind of emergency situation, then please call 999 or, 911 in the States.
And what is your tip for someone listening right now who is newly out of an abusive relationship but isn't sure what to do next to try to recover?
This is a really interesting question because I think, the effects of domestic abuse can last for a really long time, even after you've left an abusive partner. And I think, you might expect to feel better once you've left. And it may come as a bit of a shock or a surprise if that doesn't happen straight away. There'll be some days when you feel like you're taking one step forward. There'll be other days where you feel like you're maybe moving backwards. And, again, I really would get in touch with their local domestic abuse support service because they may have specialist counselling or access to support groups for you and your children. But I guess, however you are feeling and however you respond is valid, and reaching out to somebody for help is a really huge step in finding support and, starting that journey to recovery.
Excellent, excellent advice, Rosie. Rosie, I am so happy to have had you on the show today. And again, this was Rosie Watson with the Domestic Abuse Alliance, national organization in the United Kingdom. And you've been listening to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Rosie.
Thank you, Laurie.